I gave 15 years to a company I pulled from the brink, only for my boss to fire me without a second thought. He didn't know my silence was the beginning of his downfall. My fingertips lingered on the contract papers, still warm from the printer, as I stood in the doorway of Greg Harper's office that Tuesday morning. The familiar weight of exhaustion hung in my shoulders after another sleepless night finalizing the $5 million deal that would keep Trans Global Solutions afloat for the next 2 years. But there was something else there too. Pride. 15 years of climbing through the ranks at this mid-sized Denver logistics company had taught me to savor these rare moments of victory. "Got a minute?" I asked, tapping lightly on his open door. Greg didn't look up from his computer, the blue light casting harsh shadows across his face. "Come in, Sarah." I placed the contract on his glass desk, the same desk I'd helped him select 5 years ago when we'd moved to the downtown office. Langford signed. $5 million, 2-year commitment, exclusive logistics partnership. I couldn't help the slight upward curve of my lips. Their CEO said our implementation timeline was what sealed the deal. Greg's fingers stopped their perpetual typing. He looked up, but not at the contract. His eyes, cool gray that had once seemed authoritative, but now just looked empty, fixed on me without a flicker of recognition for what I'd just accomplished. "Close the door, Sarah." The air conditioning vent above his desk hummed loudly in the sudden silence. My hand instinctively tightened around the pen in my pocket. A gift from my daughter, Ellie, on my 10-year work anniversary. "Is something wrong?" Greg folded his hands on the desk, the same position he'd assumed last year when telling the warehouse staff about the holiday bonus cuts. "We're letting you go," he said, his voice flat like he was reading a weather report. "The board wants to cut costs, and your salary is too high. Effective immediately." The pen snapped in my pocket. I felt the ink seeping through my blazer, but I couldn't move. After 15 years? My voice didn't sound like my own, higher, thinner. After everything I've done? The words tumbled out before I could stop them. In 2018, I worked 80-hour weeks when we nearly went bankrupt. In 2022, I implemented the tracking system that saved us $2 million annually. Just last month, It's business, Sarah. Greg cut me off, already turning back to his computer. "Nothing personal. Pack your things. Security will escort you out." Business. The word echoed in my mind as I walked back to my office on legs that didn't feel like mine. Business was the excuse I'd given my daughter for missing her elementary school graduation. Business was why I'd postponed my knee surgery 3 times. Business was the reason I hadn't visited my mother more than twice before she died last year. My office, with its view of the mountains I rarely had time to visit, suddenly felt foreign. Photos of my team smiled at me from the wall. A ceramic mug Ellie had painted sat next to my computer. A stack of handwritten thank you notes from clients was wedged between binders of reports I'd meticulously prepared over the years. The security guard, Dave, whose son's college application I'd helped with last year, stood awkwardly by my door, avoiding eye contact. My hands trembled as I placed each item into a cardboard box that seemed too small for 15 years of my life. "I'm sorry about this, Ms. Mitchell," Dave muttered, his eyes fixed on the floor. Outside my office, I could hear the hushed whispers of my colleagues. Amanda from accounting caught my eye briefly before looking away, her face flushed. Mark from operations quickly stepped back into his office as I passed. These people, some I'd trained, some I'd comforted through divorces and deaths, some whose children I'd watched grow through yearly holiday party photos, now avoided me like I carried something contagious. The walk to the elevator felt endless. Each step on the gray carpet I'd helped select during the office renovation echoed with memories. Late nights, early mornings, canceled vacations, missed birthdays, all sacrificed for Transglobal. In the parking garage, the spring sunshine felt like a mockery. I placed the box in my trunk and slid into the driver's seat of my sensible sedan. Another reminder of my practical, work-focused life. My fingers gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. But I didn't start the engine. Instead, I stared at the Transglobal logo on the parking garage wall until my vision blurred. Not with tears, I was too hollow for tears, but with a strange detachment, as if I were watching someone else's life collapse. And then, like a flash of lightning illuminating a dark landscape, I remembered. 1 year ago, I'd been preparing for our annual audit, buried under mountains of financial records in the conference room at 11 p.m. The office had been silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional ping of emails arriving on my phone. Usually Ellie asking when I'd be home. That's when I'd noticed it. A recurring payment to a vendor called Peak Pulse Solutions. $12,500 on the 15th of every month for the past 2 years. $300,000 total. The problem? I oversaw all operational vendors, and I'd never heard of Peak Pulse. I dug deeper, following the electronic trail through our records. Peak Pulse had no website, no LinkedIn profile, no business registration in Colorado. Their only address led to a vacant office space in a strip mall on the outskirts of Denver. The invoices were vague. Consulting services, with no breakdown of hours or deliverables. But most damning of all was what I'd found when I cross-referenced the bank account receiving our payments. A shell company registered in the Cayman Islands with a single beneficial owner, Gregory A. Harper. My coffee had gone cold beside me as I stared at the screen, the pieces falling into place. Greg was embezzling from Transglobal, the company I'd helped him build, the company I'd sacrificed everything for. The next morning, I'd confronted him privately, armed with printouts and a USB drive containing all the evidence. "What is this, Greg?" I'd asked, sliding the papers across his desk. His face had remained impressively neutral, but I hadn't missed the slight twitch at the corner of his eye. "A misunderstanding with a contractor," he'd said smoothly. "I've been consulting on the side, with board approval. The payment structure is complicated." "Through a shell company in your name?" My voice had been steady, even as my heart raced. Greg had leaned forward then, his voice dropping. "Sarah, you've been with me from the beginning. You know how this business works. Sometimes things get messy. I'll handle it. Trust me." And I had trusted him, or wanted to. I'd kept the evidence on the USB drive, locked in my home safe, telling myself it was for the company's protection. In reality, perhaps I'd been protecting myself from the uncomfortable truth about the man I'd dedicated my career to. Now, sitting in my car in the parking garage, that memory burned like acid. Greg hadn't just fired me. He'd thrown away 15 years of loyalty like it was nothing, and I'd been silent about his crime. But silence could be wielded like a weapon. It was time he learned that. My house felt eerily quiet when I arrived home that afternoon. Without the usual rush to check emails or prepare for tomorrow's meetings, time stretched before me like an unfamiliar landscape. I placed the box from my office on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a long moment before pushing it aside. Instead, I walked to the framed photo hanging in my hallway. Ellie and me at Garden of the Gods 2 summers ago, one of the rare weekends I'd been fully present. My phone turned off. I carefully removed the frame from the wall, revealing the small safe behind it. The USB drive felt impossibly light in my palm for something containing such damning evidence. I plugged it into my laptop and reviewed the files. Transaction records spanning 2 years, emails between Greg and the shell company, bank statements, registration documents, all meticulously organized by my own hand. My finger hovered over the phone. One call to the board could set everything in motion. But the thought of Greg explaining it away, turning the company against me, made my stomach clench. He'd been careful to build his reputation while I'd built the company. Who would they believe? No, this required strategy, not impulse. I called my brother Ryan instead. As a forensic accountant who'd worked on corporate fraud cases, he understood the delicate nature of what I was planning. His voice on the phone was cautious at first, then increasingly concerned as I explained what had happened. "Sarah, this is serious," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, though no one else could hear him. "If what you have checks out, Greg could face federal charges. But we need to be smart about this. The board might close ranks around him. You know how these things work. We need to go straight to the authorities." "I don't just want him to lose his job, Ryan," I said, surprising myself with the coldness in my voice. "I want him to feel what I felt today. Powerless, humiliated, betrayed." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. "Come over tomorrow," Ryan finally said. "Bring everything you have. We'll map this out properly." After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from my untouched tea. For the first time in years, I had nowhere to be, no crisis to manage, no client to appease. The silence of my home, a silence I'd rarely experienced, wrapped around me like an unfamiliar blanket. I reached for my phone and texted Amanda from accounting. "Can we meet for coffee tomorrow? Just you and me." Amanda had been at Trans Global almost as long as I had. She'd never hidden her disdain for Greg's management style, and I knew she'd be my eyes inside the company now that I was gone. My phone buzzed with her reply. "OMG, yes. Red Rock's coffee at 9? So sorry about today. Everyone's in shock." I set my phone down and finally took a sip of my tea, now lukewarm. The tightness in my chest had transformed into something else. A controlled burn rather than the rawness of betrayal. Greg thought he'd eliminated a threat by firing me. He didn't realize he'd just created one. The next week unfolded with methodical precision. Ryan helped me organize the evidence into an airtight case. Bank statements cross-referenced with company financial records, emails printed and highlighted. The complex web of Greg's embezzlement mapped out in undeniable detail. We met with a contact of his at the IRS. A stern woman named Vanessa, who specialized in corporate fraud investigations. "This is textbook embezzlement," she'd said, studying the documents with narrowed eyes. "We'll need to verify everything, of course, but this is more than enough to open a formal investigation." Meanwhile, my coffee with Amanda had proved invaluable. She'd agreed to be my inside source without hesitation. "The place is falling apart without you," she'd whispered across the table at Red Rocks Coffee. "That Langford contract?" Greg's trying to manage it himself, and he's already missed 2 implementation deadlines. "Keep me posted," I'd said, sliding her a burner phone. "Anything unusual, any meetings with the board, any mention of financial audits, I want to know." But I needed more than the slow wheels of an IRS investigation. I needed the court of public opinion. So I reached out to Emily Carter, a business journalist known for her exposés on corporate corruption. We met at a park miles from TransGlobal's office, where I gave her just enough information to pique her interest, without revealing my identity as the source. TransGlobal Solutions CEO involved in embezzlement. Hundreds of thousands missing, I told her. Check their vendor payments to Peak Pulse Solutions. Emily's eyes had lit up with the intensity only investigative journalists possess. "Who are you? Why are you telling me this?" "Someone who believes in accountability," I'd answered, already walking away. Then, against every instinct I'd developed over 15 years of crisis management, I did nothing. I didn't call Greg. I didn't reach out to my former team. I didn't attempt to salvage the Langford contract I'd worked so hard to secure. Instead, I let silence do the work for me. 7 days after my firing, the first cracks appeared in Greg's facade. "Something's happening," Amanda texted from the burner phone. "Greg's been in closed-door meetings with the board all day. He looks panicked." I was sitting in my backyard, enjoying the spring sunshine that I'd usually only glimpse through office windows, when the text arrived. The IRS had moved faster than I'd anticipated, freezing TransGlobal's accounts pending their investigation. Without access to operational funds, the company would be paralyzed. No money for payroll, for vendors, for daily operations. Later that afternoon, Emily Carter published her first article. TransGlobal Solutions under investigation. Allegations of financial misconduct surface at Denver logistics firm. It was carefully worded to avoid libel, but the implications were clear. By evening, 3 of TransGlobal's major clients had called emergency meetings with their legal teams. I learned from Amanda that the Langford contract, my final achievement at TransGlobal, was the first to go. They cited concerns about financial stability and ethical business practices. She reported. Greg looked like he might have a stroke when he got the call. Each day brought new developments. TransGlobal's stock began to slide as rumors spread through Denver's business community. Clients who had been loyal for years suddenly found reasons to delay payments or reduce orders. The board, initially supportive of Greg, grew increasingly hostile as the financial impact became apparent. "Greg's on administrative leave," Amanda texted on day 9. "The board forced him out while the investigation continues. Everyone's talking about you now. How you were the only one who could have prevented this mess." I imagined Greg sitting in his modernist living room with its view of the mountains, watching his carefully constructed world crumble. The image should have brought satisfaction, but instead I felt strangely hollow. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice, not just for me, but for every employee who'd given their best to a company, led by a thief. On day 10, I mailed the complete USB drive to Vanessa at the IRS, along with a detailed letter explaining every transaction, every conversation with Greg, every piece of evidence I'd gathered. I signed it simply, Sarah Mitchell, the one you thought you could erase. Greg's arrest came 2 weeks after my firing. I watched it on the local news, a brief segment showing him being escorted from his home in handcuffs, his face ashen under the morning sunlight. The reporter's voiceover detailed the charges: embezzlement, fraud, money laundering. Sources say the investigation began after a tip from a former employee, she concluded. TransGlobal's reputation, already damaged by the investigation, collapsed entirely. Clients fled en masse. The board tried desperately to distance themselves, claiming ignorance of Greg's actions, but it was too late. Within a month, the company filed for bankruptcy. 300 employees, including Amanda, found themselves without jobs. That part hadn't been in my plan. The collateral damage weighed on me more than I'd expected. "Don't you dare feel guilty," Amanda said, when we met for coffee after she'd cleaned out her desk. This company was rotting from the inside out. Better a quick death than a slow one. I never wanted everyone to lose their jobs, I admitted. Amanda shrugged. Most of us have already found new positions. Turns out, former TransGlobal employee not involved in the scandal is a pretty decent resume line these days. She stirred her latte thoughtfully. The interim CEO called you yet? He had. Michael Chen, a former colleague who'd been appointed to guide the company through bankruptcy proceedings. "Sarah, we need you," he'd pleaded over the phone. "You were the only one who truly understood the operational infrastructure. Help us salvage what's left." I declined. That chapter of my life was closed. Instead, I'd accepted a consulting position with Sierra Logistics, a rival firm that had admired my work from afar for years. On my terms, flexible hours, remote work options, profit sharing rather than a fixed salary. I'd also taken on freelance projects for smaller companies, helping them build the efficient systems that had been my specialty at TransGlobal. For the first time in 15 years, I controlled my own time. I took Ellie hiking on weekends. I finally had the knee surgery I'd been postponing. I reconnected with friends who'd stopped calling because I was always working. "You seem different, Mom," Ellie commented one evening as we prepared dinner together, another new routine. "Happier." I considered this as I chopped vegetables. I am different, I realized. I'm present. 6 months after my firing, I received a letter from the district attorney's office. Greg had accepted a plea deal. 5 years in prison, restitution of all stolen funds, permanent disbarment from serving as an officer in any publicly traded company. The letter thanked me for my cooperation in building the case against him. I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer without feeling the vindication I'd expected. Greg had lost everything: his job, his reputation, his freedom. According to Amanda, who still kept tabs on former colleagues, his wife had left him shortly after his arrest. He was living in a modest apartment near the courthouse, awaiting sentencing. That evening, I sat on my back porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, a view I'd rarely appreciated during my years at TransGlobal. I thought about the USB drive that had sat in my safe for a year before I'd used it, about the loyalty I'd given to a man who hadn't deserved it, about the years I'd lost to a company that had discarded me without hesitation. The anger that had fueled me those first weeks after my firing had faded, replaced by something quieter but more sustainable: determination. Determination to build a life that couldn't be taken away with a single conversation, to create success on my own terms, to be present for the people who truly mattered. I'd used part of my consulting earnings to place a down payment on a small cabin in the mountains, a weekend retreat where Ellie and I could escape the city. I'd started sketching plans for my own logistics consultancy, one built on transparency and work-life balance. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I still thought about those 15 years at Transglobal. The sacrifices, the achievements, the misplaced loyalty. I used to feel angry about the time I'd lost. But now I recognize the lessons I'd gained. Greg thought he could betray me and walk away unscathed. He thought I would fade into the background of his success story. But I didn't need to scream or fight to claim my justice. I didn't need to become like him to defeat him. I just needed to be patient, strategic, and silent. In the end, that was the most powerful revenge of all. Watching him fall while I discovered how high I could rise on my own.